So this morning you heard about STL travels, and I'm going to be speaking about memory, translation memory also, but from a rather different point of view. I'm going to be talking about it from the point of view of translators who use it. I used, not Travels, but another memory program myself for every day, all day, for 8 years where I worked. So I have experience in memory. In a couple of minutes, I'm going to be telling you about a survey which I conducted, first back in 2011, and then again earlier this year, of certified translators here in Ontario about how they feel about memory. The basic idea behind memory is simple. It's just recycling old wordings from old translations. Well, you heard about that this morning, so I won't say any more about it. Before I start, though, I'd like to see, I didn't get a feeling this morning about how many people use it. So could you put up your hand if you currently use a translation memory program? Thank you. And put up your hand if you used to use one, but you don't use one anymore. Oh. Okay. So in my view, memory, like all technologies, is neither good nor bad in itself. It depends on who is in control of its use. And this is especially important when a technology has certain well-known defects. And memory programs certainly do have certain well-known defects. And these arise from the fact that the technology was originally created way back in the early 1990s, I think, by engineers, software engineers, who knew little about translation and received little or no input from working translators. They were trying to help the software localization industry produce high volumes of frequently updated text that feature large numbers of repetitions. And memory software certainly seems to be very suited to that kind of text, but is often not so useful for other kinds of text. A couple of examples of defects. Many of the common memory programs only display one segment at a time, so you don't get a feel of, you're not constantly being visually reminded that you're translating a whole text. But that sense is just a contribution to the meaning, to a meaning that's flowing through the whole text. Also, of course, the current segment in memory may not be all that suitable for the text into which it's being fitted. The old wording may not quite work. It may not fit perfectly with the previous sentence, for example. So the question is, who decides how to handle these kind of defects? The defects themselves can be annoying, but they're not the problem, in my opinion. The problem is who is in control, who decides how to handle the defects. So the gradual appearance of memory in large numbers of translation workplaces over the past 20 years, this appearance of memory seems to be creating the conditions of what you might call a classic industrial conflict, at least in some workplaces. Managers and owners of translation services, as well as clients, want to increase productivity, and memory is alleged to increase productivity. Whereas translators, of course, want their share of any profits from such increases, and they don't want to be rushed or told how to produce translations. So there may be conflict in the sense of opposing interests, depending on who is in control. So wherever there's conflict of interest, there's both an objective aspect and a subjective aspect. On the one hand, how are employers or agency managers or even clients implementing their policies on the use of memory? On the other hand, how do translators feel about what is happening with memory? Here are some objective issues. Do employers or agencies increase translators' productivity requirements when memory is introduced? Or do they expect translations to be produced much faster than they used to be? Do employers or agencies give translators less credit for matches that are found in the memory database? Or pay them less, or give them less credit if they're salaried translators? Do employers or agencies penalize a failure to use 100% matches without revision? There are employers who actually require the use of 100% matches without revision. Here are some of the subjective issues. Do translators feel in control of the wording of their translations? This is vital, of course. If you're going to be a professional, you have to be in control of the wording that comes out at the end. Do translators have a sense of losing the ability to compose their own translations? If the memory is constantly finding wordings for you, how much time each day are you spending composing your own wording? Does use of memory increase or decrease satisfaction with working life? Do translators feel that the use of memory is reducing or enhancing the status of translators in the society? So there are several methods of gathering information. There's surveys, such as the one I'm going to be talking about in a minute. Interviews have been conducted with translators and managers. There's an ethnographic approach in which researchers go into translation workplaces and observe and participate. There's analysis of the commentary at translator websites like proz.com and translators.cafe.com. You can find commentary on memory. And a very interesting method was used by two Finnish researchers recently, and that is they asked people to write either love letters or breakup letters to some aspect of their workspace. It wasn't necessarily a memory. They could say, "Dear Internet," or they could even say, "Dear ergonomic chair," if they wanted. And the researcher, these two Finnish researchers, like everyone else whose research I've read, find that feelings about memory in particular are very much divided. Now, in the letters they received from Finnish translators and European Union translators that mentioned some kind of technology, not necessarily memory, they had 43 love letters, 25 breakup letters, and 4 ambivalent letters. However, the European Union translators, who all use STL Trados Studio, or are required to use STL Trados Studio, and of course we're talking about a couple of thousand people here. Now they didn't receive the total number of people involved, and this is quite small, like with all these projects. They received 4 love letters and 6 breakup letters. Canadian findings, Mathieu Leblanc of the University of Moncton conducted several of these ethnographic studies where he went into 3 Canadian workplaces, and he reported a decline in professional satisfaction due to memory specifically at 2 of the 3 Canadian workplaces he observed. And at these 2 workplaces, translators were not in control of how memory were used. He made a point of that. He queried people very carefully and discovered that they were being told how to use it rather than just being allowed to use it however they wished. In the 3rd workplace, where translators were happy, they were allowed to use memory however they wished to use it. So most sources of information are very heavy on the purely technical aspect of memory. And considerable attention is also paid to the economic aspects. Relatively little attention has been paid to the psychosocial aspects, though there's been more attention paid to that in recent years. This is how memory affects professional and personal satisfaction. So here's a question. To what extent is satisfaction or dissatisfaction with memory due mostly to technical matters, that is, how easy it is to use a given memory system? And to what extent is satisfaction or dissatisfaction due to economic issues or to control over how you use memory? So on to the surveys which I did. As you can see, I received about the same number of surveys in both years, though my proportion of returns was a bit lower this year. And I discovered that back in 2011, 60% of people had never used memory, whereas this year, only 44% had never used it, which suggests that memory, even though it's been around for 20 years, is still only entering rather slowly. It's not like, say, Google Internet search research, which appeared in 1998 and everyone adopted it right away. It was just wonderful. You didn't have to go out to libraries and fish through paper documents anymore. By the way, there was very little overlap. There were only 4 people who replied to both surveys. So this isn't This wasn't intended to be a quantitative study. I asked a variety of questions, some closed questions like yes, no, or multiple choice questions, and some open questions where the respondents could write as much as they wanted. And I'll be giving some figures in a moment on the closed questions, but that may not be all that meaningful because the survey only went to ATIO certified French-to-English translators who may or may not be representative of translators in Ontario. My main interest is going to be the answers to the open questions where people just wrote whatever they wanted to write. So here are the figures on a question where I asked them whether on the whole they like memory, have mixed feelings about memory, or basically hate memory. And as you can see, things didn't change much from 2011 to 2017. About half people liked it, and about half had either mixed feelings or hated it. Let's see what you think about this. Of those of you who use memory, put up your hand if you basically, on the whole, like it. And one person, basically 2, 3. What about mixed feelings? Oh, more mixed feelings. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And what about 8? 2. All right, well, this is typical, sort of a range of opinions with lots of likes and lots of mixed feelings and a couple of hates. Now, I'm not going to go over, on these two screens, I just have a long list of factors that may explain the difference as to why people like it, why they have these feelings, why they hate it. And I'm not going to go over all these reasons now. Instead, I'm just going to focus on the very first one in bold as to whether the translator is required to use memory or not required to use it. So here are the answers I received about the question whether people were required to use memory. As you can see, a much higher proportion were required to use memory in 2017 than in 2011, about 60% now versus 44% back then. And correspondingly, a much lower proportion were fully in control of their use of memory. In other words, you don't have to, 40% now versus 56% back in 2011. Now, I didn't tell the respondents what I meant by required, so it could be a range of things. It might just mean a requirement to work in a memory environment with at least some text and at least consider any matches which the memory finds. At the other extreme, it might mean a requirement to use memory with every single text and compulsory use of 100% matches. So there's a range that's been found. Other people have found this too. There's quite a range in what is required by employers and agencies. Now here is the correlation. Oops. Sorry. The correlation between the requirement to use memory and the general feeling people have about memory. And as you can see, among people who are required to use memory, the likes are below 30%, whereas among people who are not required to use memory, the likes are above 60%. Both in 2011 and 2017, less than 30% of those required to use memory liked it, whereas over 60% of those not required to use it liked it. Okay. By the way, the 4 people who answered both surveys in both 2011 and 2017, the 2 who are not required to use memory both liked it both times. And the 2 who were required to use memory liked it in 2011 and had mixed feelings in 2017. But of course, that's not very many people. So now I'm going to go on to some of the open comments. The reasons respondents gave for disliking memory, which I've divided into technical comments, economic comments, and professional and personal dissatisfaction comments. And I'm mainly interested in the third column. I'm forced to use TM even when I don't think it's appropriate. It's frustrating to fix up the fuzzy matches found by TM, that is translation memory. It's frustrating to complete the translation of a sentence where parts of it have been pre-translated by TM. The creativity in translation lies in composing my own sentences. TMs recycle error, thus reducing quality. Yes, this is a notorious problem with memory. In theory, the text in the database have been carefully revised by someone. In practice, there's often a lot of junk in the memory. Unless, of course, it's your own, unless, of course, all the text in it are your own personal text, then presumably there's not a lot of junk in it. I hate seeing mistakes in pre-translated material which I'm not supposed to touch, or stylistic inconsistencies between the chunks that have been pre-translated by memory. Okay, so those were some of the comments back in 2011. Here are some comments from 2017, again in the third column. It's useful for some text, but not all. The employer does not seem to make this distinction. Below 90-95% fuzzy matches. These tools are time-consuming and pointless. This can be very hard to explain to a non-translator. Moving through text and displaying possible translations one unit at a time is tedious. I get migraines from working in Studio SDLX for entire days because it's difficult reading and differentiating text without formatting. Also, the tag features are irritating. The tools are better at ensuring consistency than quality, which ultimately demands that translators sacrifice professionalism for profitability. And now some of the reasons for liking memory, back in TM. I'll read all of these. The technical ones, it helps me create consistency, it helps me find terminology. Economic, I make more money because I can translate more text in less time than I can without memory. And in the third column, it gives me translation ideas I would not have thought of. That's something also I found when I was using memory, get ideas you wouldn't have thought of. And seeing other that's as long as you have access to the full database. If you don't, then it may not give you any ideas you would have thought of. Seeing other translations in original writings in the target language increases my confidence in the quality of my final decision. As you get, if it's a database that includes lots of people's translations, you get to see how other people translate and get some sense of whether you're doing just as well as them or not, or better than them. And here are some reasons for liking memory from this year. It makes consistent use of terminology much easier. That's a very, very common bit of praise for memory. Excellent source of terminology and client-approved phrases, another well-known advantage. Economic, it often enables me to substantially reduce the price I charge. And it saves an enormous amount of time. And then under personal and professional satisfaction, it's much easier on the eyes, placing the original and target sentence beside each other. Hello. No, comment on this. Good source of translation options. This is a reference to the concordance function where you can see all, if you can see all the possible matches that the memory found, not just some people are in a situation where they all, where one of the matches is selected for them. When there are a significant number of 100% matches, memory is very good and a pleasure to work with, especially on team projects. It's the most valuable tool I have. Not working with Travis is like having one hand tied behind my back. So you can see this huge range of opinions. People have very different opinions about memory. Now here's an interesting thing that I found. If you look at the last item in the first two columns, you'll see dots after them. Excellent source of terminology and client-approved phrases, ... Now here's the full sentence. They're an excellent source of terminology and client-approved phrases, assuming that the memory is maintained appropriately and not filled with junk. Saves an enormous amount of time as long as by-texts are aligned well. Sometimes the memory doesn't align text all that well. So the chunk you're seeing on the translation side is not, in fact, a translation of what you're seeing on the source text side. It's good for boilerplate translations, but where you need to be somewhat creative, it restricts you, and so on. So I found a huge number of these sentences that start out with a piece of praise and then have a word like but, or as long as, or however. So it was quite interesting. As soon as people said something positive, for some reason, immediately something negative came to mind right away, and I didn't find any of the opposite, where first some people thought of something negative to say, and then said, but on the other hand, here's something good. So I thought that was interesting. Here's some comments about changes over the years. I don't like the tunnel vision effect of sentence-by-sentence translation, because in some memory programs, as some of you will know, you can only see a sentence at a time. You can't see the rest of the text. However, I've learned to live with it by using two screens, to be able to refer to the entire source text if need be. So this person is adapted to one of the defects, and obviously is able to adapt, because not everyone is in a position to have two screens, but this person is able to. I hated it, the previous software at my former company, and SDLX at my current employer for years, and found it difficult to work with and useless. However, and notice though, this is a good but bad. This is a case where something bad is stated and then something good, but it's a change over time. So it's different from what I was showing you on the previous screen. So I hated it for years and found it difficult to work with and useless. However, after years of using it and switching to Studio 2015, Group Share, and multi-turn as well, I'm able to sort out which projects are great for using memories and which are best done outside of machine translation software, and can negotiate that this person is using machine translation to improve memory. I've also been able to adapt how I translate to continue to deliver idiomatic text despite the initial file being segmented, which to me is the hardest part. So again, this person is in a position to say, well, in this text I'm going to use memory, and in this text I'm not going to use it. The newer versions of the software are considerably more user-friendly and less cumbersome. They interfere much less with the translation process and actually help with consistency and speed. And finally, in the beginning, I liked the novelty and the promise of memory. I was also part of a team working on repetitive material. It was very useful for ensuring consistency. However, it could also multiply errors to the point of being useless, if not downright unproductive. Often the suggested translation is meaningless in the context. I find I do the same amount of work, but I'm paid less because someone somewhere has decided a 50% match should take me less time to fix than simply translating what's in front of me. So, has there been a change over the years? Well, there are fewer technical complaints I found in the surveys I received. Is that because the systems have improved? Well, maybe. Or is it because people have gotten used to the drawbacks of memory and figured out how to adapt to it? Could be either of those. My survey doesn't really reveal that. As far as economic aspects and personal satisfaction are concerned, the same reasons for liking or disliking memory are being voiced in my study as in others. The proportion of overall likes versus dislikes seems to be unchanged, but my surveys don't really reveal whether more or fewer people like or dislike memory for this or that particular reason or set of reasons. So I'm not going to go over this, but in my next version of the survey, a few years from now, I'm going to try to ask questions to try to get at the more particular reasons why people like or dislike it. Now, coming to my conclusion now, professional satisfaction will, I think, in part be determined by the concept of acceptable quality that's held by employers and agency managers. Satisfaction will decline to the extent that employers and managers come to think of quality as whatever memory, and possibly machine translation, is able to produce with minimal revision. So in other words, the concept of quality may actually change as pressure to use technology increases. By the way, a few years ago, two Danish researchers, speaking of quality, 2 Danish researchers looked through all the literature, for as much as they could find, literature on memory, and they found this. Most practitioners seem to take for granted that memory technology speeds up production time and improves translation quality, but there are no studies that actually document this. Now, they mean, of course, published studies. There may be private studies. Though I suspect what these reveal is that the technology does indeed increase production, the speed of production, but they probably fudge the question of quality, which is a much harder thing to get at than speed. Speed is easily quantified. Quality is not easily quantified. What about the impact of generational change on professional satisfaction? It's possible that a different kind of person will be recruited, or perhaps is now already being recruited to the ranks of translators, and that is someone who likes editing. Lots of people do like editing, and it may be that editors will turn out to be happier users of memory, which after all just calls upon you to edit target language material which is already there in front of you. I'm not all that optimistic about the future, though, of course, we'll see. I'm going to leave you with this rather grim comment from 2011. I believe that in my lifetime, automated translation will replace translators and translation as we know them today. Translators' incomes will drop dramatically as they become revisers, that is, editors of pre-translated work. And translation work will be concentrated in the hands of a few large, primarily non-Canadian agencies that have the resources to invest in expensive technology and networks. I believe the Canadian industry will be bought out by multinational interests unless it has legislative protection. Ironically, the big money is in automated translation equipment and software, not translation itself. I therefore view memories as a major change that will constitute progress for many and the demise of the profession for some. So I leave you with that unhappy comment. Thank you.
We have time for some questions for Brian, so we have 5 minutes. Actually, we have 10 minutes for questions. 10 minutes to 3:45. Any, Lucia?
I didn't hear too many comments about, I guess there was people who don't use it and people who do use it and not people who are like trying to use it. Kalal's comment earlier during the SDL presentation where she said, it's me. I didn't understand how to use this program and that's why I don't use it. I find that to be very interesting to think that there are these programs that to some degree I think are not being questioned as like these innovative things, and yet a lot of people find them to be impossible or very, very difficult to use. And I didn't see that so much in the comment. I wondered if you could comment on that a little, or...
Oh, the reason there wasn't anything on that is that I asked people who didn't use memory every day, that is, people had either given up or had never even thought to try it. I told them just to stop answering the survey. So there was nothing from those people.
Hello, it's André. I have a question about the use of memory products. Are they ever used in a unilingual environment for technical writing?
Oh. I have no idea. Does anyone else know the answer to that? Whether they're used to retrieve material when you're just working in a single language?
I didn't actually think of my former job. I didn't think of it as that, and I don't work with Trados or with any. I used to think it was called Trados until today. With any memory translation or memory technology, but my previous job I was a knowledge base analyst, and I worked with multiple languages, but not in a bilingual or transferable sense. So I worked in a knowledge base in English and in French and in Spanish. And it was, in a sense, the software was almost like AI, where it would learn from our input, which is to some degree the same as memory translation. So that's an example of a place where that is used. So we formatted something that would allow the back end of business websites to deliver answers when people ask questions. So it was based on a large amount of input over a consistent basis. That
Okay.
helps.
One of the sites I go on a regular basis uses crowdsourcing for their translations. It's very specific industry, and it's not life and death or anything. It's just, that's what they use. They use crowdsourcing for their translation. What do you think of that?
Well, I don't have any specific thoughts about it because I've heard of it, but I have no experience of it, so I don't have any real opinions about it. Sorry.
When I first learned about translation memory, it was the company I worked for was in the early 90s, and we went to the States, we went to ATA, and we found that everyone was using translation memory. We weren't using it in Canada at all. So we got off the bandwagon very early, finding that was a competitive advantage. What I would say is I've been in the industry at management level for 35 years, and I'll be very honest with you, the CVs I get, if they don't say they're using some kind of CAT tool, I don't even look at them. Like, I literally say, to me, that's somebody who I can't work with, because a lot of the projects we have absolutely require it. And so people can make the choice that they don't want to do it, and they don't, and yeah, there is some effort to learn it like any other tool, and there are courses out there. What I'm saying is that it's very much limiting the kind of work you can get if you do not use translation memory at least some of the time. So I would really say to people who think, gosh, I don't want to take that, that's always a choice, but they will eventually find it harder and harder to get any work at all.
Sorry, just a comment from the other side. I'm a very old-fashioned translator for the moment. Maybe it will change in the future. But when I see the proposal of translation and they mention translation memories, I usually don't look into it and just decline it right away. So the other side of the same medal.
Any other questions? Lucia?
Did your survey ask any demographic questions? Like, I wonder if younger people are using it more, or like how long they've been certified for, or questions like that?
No, in my list of factors, I did include the age of the translator, but it wasn't on the survey, so I don't know how old the translators or whether generation makes a difference or not.